What is critical thinking anyway? In today's video, I'm going to do something very ambitious, and I hope you will bear with me. I'm going to try to explain specifically what's wrong with teaching critical race theory or anything grounded in its type of thinking style or its approach in a classroom with minor children. Let's say K through 12. Okay. I'm going to try to do that by going through some materials first from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy about critical thinking, specifically kind of what it is and what it isn't. The reason I've chosen this particular source, because obviously there are different sources that explain critical thinking, is that it talks about Dewey. And Dewey, as you know, had a lot to do with our public school system. And while I've been critical of Dewey on this channel, specifically when I went through the book by John Taylor Gatto, I think we could at least agree, those of us who oppose critical race theory and those of us who don't, that Dewey was influential in the development of our system as it is, of the standards for public education that we have, and is widely regarded as an expert in teaching and learning of children. I think we could probably, if I had to guess, we'd probably agree on those basic points as a starting point. So rather than choose somebody outside of education to help us go through what critical thinking is and isn't, I thought I would start with Dewey. I'm also going to explain what I mean by indoctrination when I use that term on this channel. And I'm going to talk about how I see critical race theory specifically being anti-critical thinking in the Dewey sense. In other words, not an example of it. How I would liken it more to a faith than a theory at all. And why I believe most of what we are hearing in the mainstream media from politicians who support critical theory and critical race theory, from educators, school boards, teachers, even some students who support critical race theory is actually propaganda. That's the last thing I'm going to try to get to. And this is ambitious. I'm biting off a big chunk. Like I said, hope you'll bear with me. And before I get started on that, I do want to make a plug for this channel and all of my platforms. If you like the work I do, if you appreciate it, find value in it, I hope you will consider subscribing to not just this channel, but also my locals community. It's free to join. However, for a very small support each month, you can participate in weekly Zoom calls and get access to some of my proprietary content with regard to homeschooling. You can pick my brain as far as research into education, your own school district, etc. If you need that sort of help, I offer all of that to my members for the same low little monthly support, but it also makes this work possible. So even if you didn't take advantage of any of the features there, it does make this work possible. So having said that, let's get into this. First, what is critical thinking? I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to read all of it to you, just the high points. And I will put a link to this in the description box. You can go through this in detail yourself. Critical thinking is a widely accepted educational goal. Its definition is contested, but the competing definitions can be understood as differing conceptions of the same basic concept: careful thinking directed to a goal. Conceptions differ with respect to the scope of such thinking, the type of goal, the criteria and norms for thinking carefully, and the thinking components in which they focus. Its adoption as an educational goal has been recommended on the basis of respect for students' autonomy and preparing students for success in life and for democratic citizenship. I'm going to linger there on respect for students' autonomy. Autonomy as individuals, not members of a collective, members of an identity group, members of society or the common good or anything like that. It has been done out of respect for students' autonomy, teaching an individual to think critically and what the processes and steps and practices and skills involved in that are, is done out of respect for the need for that individual to have autonomy, or rather to maintain it. It's a given that they have it in America. We're individuals endowed with inalienable rights. And then in order to maintain it and be able to make decisions, to think towards goals for ourselves, we need to be able to think and think well, right? Critical thinkers have the dispositions and abilities that lead them to think critically when appropriate. Disposition, these are sort of personality traits and or habits, a disposition, what you're inclined to do, and abilities, the skills you need in order to do it. So you need to be proficient in language. You need to be proficient enough, not just in spoken language, but also written and oral understanding, auditory, because that's where you're going to get the information that you need to evaluate in order to make these decisions towards a goal, right? In order to think towards a goal. How can you possibly think critically if you don't have these skills? You don't have anything to use. You have nothing in your toolkit. So you could have all the disposition in the world. You could want to think critically all you want. But if you can't read and can't write and you don't understand math and you don't understand the vocabulary being used, you're very limited in your ability to think, right? The what is missing. The how is missing. So the abilities can be identified directly. We often use standardized tests to do that. The dispositions indirectly. We can observe, we can talk to people, we can ask questions, we can find out if they are disposed to think or they just want to be told what to do. By considering what factors contribute to or impede exercise of the abilities, standardized tests have been developed to assess the degree to which a person possesses such dispositions and abilities. Educational intervention has been shown experimentally to improve them, particularly when it includes dialogue, anchored instruction, and mentoring. Controversies have arisen over the generalizability of critical thinking across domains, over alleged bias in critical thinking theories and instruction, and over the relationship of critical thinking to other types of thinking. So this is not without controversy. There are people out there who say, no, critical thinking is something different. I'm defining terms as I use them, as I understand them, as a parent, as a teacher, as a student myself. For those of you who don't know, I have a master's degree in education. I also have an undergraduate degree in American Studies with heavy emphasis on American history, specifically American Revolutionary history and our foundational documents. So this is not just an area of interest for me. It's an area of some degree of expertise. I'm not usually one to appeal to authority, but I didn't just roll off the turnip truck yesterday and decide to take an interest in these topics. So I thought you ought to know where I'm coming from. So when I use these terms, that's where I'm coming from. You're more than welcome to disagree. You're more than welcome to exercise your free speech on your own platform to tell me how much you disagree with me. However, my platform is my platform and I use terms as I see fit. That's my freedom of speech. That's my autonomy. So let's look at some examples and non-examples. Now, I can't really look at the examples in detail because the 3 examples are student essays. They're very long and detailed. I encourage you to go read them. They are excellent examples of how the thought process can work. They're each written very differently, show a different style of critical thinking, but all involve the same steps, which we will get to. And here, though, are the non-examples, which I think for our purposes are more important because I'm alleging that critical race theory is a non-example of critical thinking. Immediate acceptance of an idea that suggests itself as a solution to a problem, e.g., a possible explanation of an event or phenomenon, an action that seems likely to produce a desired result, is uncritical thinking, the minimum of reflection. So, for example, when you look at the tenets of anti-racism / critical race theory, they're really not different things, okay? They're just different terms for the same ideas. You have things like all members of a society are socialized to participate in the system of racism, albeit within varied social locations. All members of a society are socialized to participate in a system of racism. Can that be known? Does that sound to you like somebody thought about that critically? That cannot be proven false? Is it falsifiable? What do I mean by falsifiable? Well, let's jump ahead, shall we? I think it's important. Unfalsifiability. Confidently asserting that a theory or hypothesis is true or false, even though the theory or hypothesis cannot possibly be contradicted by an observation or the outcome of any physical experiment, usually without strong evidence or good reasons. Making unfalsifiable claims is a way to leave the realm of rational discourse. Making unfalsifiable claims is a way to leave the realm of rational discourse. You could be as polite as could be, sweet as sugar, smile on your face, not raise your voice, not say mean words, but you have left the realm of rational discourse when you make an unfalsifiable claim. Since unfalsifiable claims are often faith-based and not founded on evidence and reason. Well, let's look at another example if my first was not clear enough. These, again, from the tenets of anti-racist thinking. And for reference, I am now reading from the core tenets of anti-racist education put forth by progressive scholars. And the most well-known of these is Robin DiAngelo, the best-selling author of White Fragility, the de facto handbook of contemporary anti-racism. All white people benefit from racism, regardless of intentions. If I say that's false, can I prove it's false? Sure can't. So can somebody go around and assert that confidently, that it's a true fact, and I can't prove they're wrong? Yeah. So do you think that's an unfalsifiable claim? Sure is. How about to not act against racism is to support racism? How many undefined terms do we have in there? Act against. Who gets to define what that looks like? Who gets to say what is not acting against? What is acting against? Who defines that? And what is support? What does support look like? What does that mean? How does that manifest? So can I prove this is wrong? Can I prove that to not act against racism is to can prove it's not true? No, I can't. It's another unfalsifiable claim. In fact, if you try to argue against this point or any of the other points I'm about to mention, you will be told that that's evidence of your white fragility and proving that these points are true. Does that sound right to you? Only a person who's racist would deny this. Only a person who's racist would argue with this. Only a person who... Every single one of those is an unfalsifiable claim. The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. Again, what is the racial status quo? Can you define that, and can I prove that the person defining it is incorrect? I can't. I can't prove it's incorrect. They haven't proven to me it's true. They literally can't prove it to me that it's true, but I also can't prove it's not true. That's what faith is. There is a God. I don't think so. Show me there's God. I don't have to show you there's God. There just is one. The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. No, I don't think that's true. You don't even know what the racial status quo is. Well, you're right, but I can't. See, I got you. Unfalsifiable claims. The racially oppressed have a more intimate insight via experiential knowledge of the system of race than their racial oppressors. There are multiple unfalsifiable claims in there. Can I prove it's not true that someone who's racially oppressed... I can't even prove that someone hasn't been racially oppressed because they keep redefining what oppression is. They keep redefining what racism is. Apparently now, you can be racially oppressed if somebody in your family was oppressed 300 years ago. You can be racially oppressed if you look like someone whose family member was oppressed 300 years ago, even if no one in your family was or was even in this country 300 years ago or 200 years ago, even 100 years ago. Simply by sharing the same skin color, you can call yourself racially oppressed. You don't have to have any overt action taken against you. So I can't prove that's wrong. Another unfalsifiable claim. How about resistance is a predictable reaction to anti-racist education and must be explicitly and strategically addressed. Well, that's like saying the sun rises in the east. Resistance is a predictable reaction. Yes, when you make unfalsifiable claims about people, why wouldn't they resist that? So, while not unfalsifiable, that is certainly the statement of the obvious. So, not really proving anything that we didn't already know. So that's what an unfalsifiable claim is. So anytime you have immediate acceptance of unfalsifiable claims or ideas that suggest themselves solutions to the problems, what's the solution to the achievement gap? Well, we need to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Why do we? How does that exactly address the achievement gap? Nobody steps back from there and asks, what is the value in measuring people's achievement based on their race in the first place? Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we set a standard for proficiency for all students in X grade and then say this percentage of students is not proficient, irrespective of their race? Why would we continue to look at them racially like that? What benefit is that? When they don't learn as a group, they learn individually. So if you see that a certain percentage of students is not doing well and you as the teacher can identify who those are in your class, it would seem to me you would need to redress that problem individually. In fact, that's literally the only way you can, because only the individual can learn, or not learn for that matter. How well an entire block of people are doing based on the amount of melanin in their skin doesn't really tell you a whole lot about how to address the problem. And yet we leap from there to the solution. And the solution is critical race theory, according to these people. Why is it though? Why is it? How does it follow that by teaching white children that they carry around with them, what was it again? This inherent racism, and that they naturally benefit from a system of racism. How does teaching the white children that improve the reading of the black children? How does teaching the black children that they are oppressed improve their reading skill? How does it improve anything for them? How does it improve anything for a human being to be told that they're oppressed? Let's say they didn't feel that way before they walked into the classroom, and now the teacher has made them aware of something they weren't aware of before. What's the benefit of being aware of something that may or may not even be true? But I certainly can't prove it's not true. Neither can the teacher. So now the teacher is advancing unfalsifiable claims to the students and readily accepting those as truth, which is encouraged. Because again, if you resist, that's evidence of your white fragility, even if you're not white, apparently. Now you've been hanging out with white people for too long. So that's discouraged, not encouraged. So what is critical thinking? So as he said before, there are many definitions, etc. But why do we do it? It's done for the purpose of making up one's mind about what to believe or do. The person engaging in the thinking is trying to fulfill standards of adequacy and accuracy appropriate to the thinking. Do you think it might be important to be accurate about what other people benefit from and don't benefit from, especially total strangers, especially small children? Do you think it might be important to be accurate in your thinking if you're going to tell a child that something is so, or that you're going to tell other adults that something is a solution to a longstanding problem? Do you think accuracy might be important? Do you think adequacy of investigation might be important? And the thinking fulfills the relevant standards to some threshold level. It does not fulfill any standard to have immediate acceptance of an idea. To be told this is so, and if you disagree, that's proof that you're a racist. Yeah, I'm not sure how many standards that. Yeah, and again, it's an unfalsifiable claim. You're a racist. How do I prove to you that I'm not? If in my effort to prove it to you, in my effort to simply declare it to not be true, when who would know my own thoughts and my own feelings better than I'm told that's not true. That in fact, my denying it is evidence of my racism because it's evidence of my white fragility, and apparently also evidence that I don't want to lose some magical powers that I have by virtue of my skin color. And that's another question. How does not teaching critical race theory in the school enable white people to maintain power? We are teaching slavery. No ban has ever said you may not teach about slavery, you may not teach about the Tulsa Massacre, you may not teach even about the studies that have turned up some obvious examples of overt racist behavior amongst people in certain environments and certain institutions, even to this present day. Certain kinds of redlining, certain kinds of behavior in real estate transactions and assessments. We could probably all agree, looking at the evidence of these specific instances, that there's a high probability there's at a minimum bias going on, if not overt racism. And yet, teaching about these facts, teaching that these things happen, is not the same thing as teaching that every single white person carries within them the ability and intention to behave that way. It is not the same thing as saying that these systems were designed and maintained to perpetuate that intentionally or even unintentionally, as opposed to individuals acting badly. Doesn't prove that. It doesn't. And yet critical race theory says it does. Critical race theory takes a little discrete example and says this proves everything in every situation everywhere with anyone who looks like this. And in fact, it proves that anyone who looks like this has the propensity or the inclination to behave this way, whether they tell you they don't or not. That's not critical thinking. That's an unfalsifiable claim. There's not evidence to support that claim. That's stretching it too far. So as I said, no one is suggesting, and it is a straw man argument to say otherwise, that we who want a ban on critical race theory want to ban any discussion of oppression of Black people in America. In fact, I say bring it on, teach more. Just teach it as these historical facts, teach it for what it is, and don't try to stretch the meaning of it to be racial essentialism. That's the difference, okay? So that's just not true. And yet they'll claim that any opposition to it means X. And I can sit here and I can tell you how that's not true and that's not what it means. And I will then again be told that my attempting to clarify that and say that's not what it means is more evidence of my racism, more evidence of white fragility. So why is it valuable to that education focus on reflective thinking? Well, Dewey thought it would be of value to both the individual has value and has a desire to learn, and they need this, and society. Recognition and educational practice of the kinship to the scientific attitude of children's native curiosity, fertile imagination, practice, and love of experimental inquiry would make for individual happiness and the reduction of social waste. Individual happiness. Nothing in here about social justice. Nothing in here about it being the individual's job, obligation, etc., to work for the common good through their education. Nothing like that. If they so choose, that might be lovely, but that is not the role of education, to make them do that, incline them to do that, or guilt them into doing it, right? Schools participating in the 8-year study took development of the habit of reflective thinking and skill in solving problems as a means to leading young people to understand, appreciate, and live the democratic way of life characteristic of the United States. And then it says, Harvey Siegel has offered 4 considerations in support of adopting critical thinking as an educational ideal. Respect for persons requires that schools and teachers honor students' demand for reasons and explanations. You know, like Gabrielle Clark's son, William, demanded to know reasons and explanations why he was being called an oppressor and why he was being told that he needed to unlearn his mother's Christian faith. And he was told he was a racist, and he was told that he was going to get a failing grade. And they shut down discussion in the middle of the class. So is that respect for his right to demand reasons and explanations? Is that dealing with students honestly and recognizing the need to confront their independent judgment? These requirements concern the manner in which teachers treat students. Are teachers treating students as individual thinkers with a right to ask these questions, or telling them that they're wrong to ask them? That in so doing, they are reflecting their what is it, their desire to maintain their comfort or something. That's not critical thinking. It's not supporting critical thinking as a goal. Education has the task of preparing children to be successful adults, a task that requires development of their self-sufficiency. Education should initiate children into the rational traditions in such fields as history, science, and mathematics. The rational tradition. Education should do these things. This is the value of critical thinking. Meanwhile, I showed you in a prior video the infographic that said that objective reasoning and they didn't say critical thinking, they just said objectivity, the scientific method, and what they called worship for the written word was whiteness. They equated almost all of this with whiteness. Whiteness being bad, of course, because whiteness is just white supremacy minus that other word. They now have come to mean the same thing. And let's see, education should prepare children to become democratic citizens, which requires reasoned procedures and critical talents and attitudes. To supplement these considerations, Siegel responds to 2 objections. The ideology objection and adoption of any educational ideal requires a prior ideological commitment. That means, yes, you need to be committed to individual liberty, the autonomy of the individual, free speech, viewpoint diversity is free speech. You need to be committed to those ideals. Yes. Yes, you do. It requires that. So is that ideological? It is. But we built a country around that. there's no getting around. You have to, in order to teach, you have to start with something. So it used to be we started with that basic idea that I may not agree with you, but I will defend your right to think and say what you want to think and say. And the most I'm going to do is challenge you to back it up. That's it. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to tell you that what you're asking is evidence of your being a bad person. I'm just going to ask you lots of questions. And if you can't back it up, I'm going to go back as a teacher and say to you, okay, well, you've made your point or you've explored your hypothesis, and I think it would be a good idea for you to go back and find some more evidence in order to be more persuasive. That is very different from saying, you're wrong. You're just a racist. You just want to keep your power. Very different. And then, of course, the indoctrination objection that cultivation of critical thinking cannot escape from being a form of indoctrination. Can't escape it. You're teaching somebody that critical thinking is good before they're able to fully assess whether it is or isn't. There's no getting around it. There's no getting around it. If you're going to teach, you're going to be saying that something is better than something else because you've chosen to teach it. Even by implication, you're indoctrinating. So we try to do it as little as possible in education, especially K through 12, because we are dealing with children whose capacity for reason is evolving with the growing brain. It is not that young children are incapable of reason. It's that they have a limited capability for it, and we have to meet them where they are. And we can scaffold, and we can give them information at a slightly higher level than where they might be at their chronological age, or they've demonstrated disposition and ability, but we can't go whole hog. We can't go into a kindergarten classroom and begin to discuss the socio-political ramifications of Black Lives Matter. That's a bit ridiculous. They lack the skills, the abilities, and the disposition to think critically about these issues. That should be obvious to anyone who is going to give this the attention it deserves and not just be jumping on me to tell me how wrong I am. Now, what's the process of thinking critically? Okay. The process, I'm going to actually, here it is. Suggestions in which the mind leaps forward to a possible solution. Okay. So you might suggest like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So the critical theorists have a suggestion. Their suggestion is that when you see disparities, it's a function of systemic racism. It's a function of racism in the society. That is their suggestion. It's not even a theory yet. It's not even a hypothesis yet. To say that that's why, that's the explanation for all of these disparities is a suggestion. Now we're leaping forward to a possible solution. Problem is they skip all the way down. They don't even test. They skip all the way down to saying that's our conclusion. We've concluded that that is so. Because the next step would be an intellectualization of the difficulty or perplexity into the problem to be solved. A question for which the answer must be sought. Do you think it is complex to try to figure out why, just as one discrete example, why there's more fatherlessness in the Black community, why there's more poverty in the Black community, why there are these academic achievement gaps in the Black community, why there is more drug-related crime, Black-on-Black crime, why there's less wealth acquisition and development, why there are fewer people going into STEM. Well, I mean, I could list like 100 different things where you could find a disparity between Black individuals and white and brown and Asian individuals. Do you think there's some complexity in each and every one of these? That's not to say they couldn't all come out with the same answer. They couldn't all satisfy the critical theorist's suggestion and be true. But do you think that there's complexity there? Or do you think it's totally safe to just jump ahead to it's racism? See, I don't. And in fact, I resist it. Even if I did, I would resist that urge because I know that things like economics and crime and, culture and all these things are so complicated that you have to work hard to resist the so-called obvious answer because it's really not as obvious as you think. The use of one suggestion after another as a leading idea or hypothesis to initiate and guide observation and other operations and collection of factual material. Now the research begins. And it's not just a single study about sending applications off for jobs and then waiting for callbacks and going, see, we're done, there's racism. You have to apply the same degree of rigorous inquiry and scientific methodology to studying the social sciences as to any other science. In fact, more so, because there's more of it that's going to be subjective. You have to be absolutely disciplined and not skip any steps. Otherwise, you're at risk of having your bias influence the outcome of the study. Not just the outcome, the design of the study to begin with. The mental elaboration of the idea or supposition as an idea or supposition. Reasoning in the sense in which reasoning is a part, not the whole, of inference. Right now, we're going to think even more. I know because I've read their documents and their theories that the critical theorists didn't do any of this. They didn't do this. They didn't. They followed this like, this is true and this is true. Therefore, this is also true because these two things exist in the same place as this third thing. Sorry, that's not science. It's not even theory. Testing the hypothesis by overt or imaginative action. Show me where that was done. Show me where Robin DiAngelo tested a hypothesis that when a white person argues with you about the intrinsic nature of their racism baked into their DNA and melanin, when a white person comes back and says, no, and I don't feel that, when you cannot tell me what I think and what I feel, where's her research to show that what that person's doing is a reflection of their racism, a reflection of something she calls white fragility? Where is it? Where's the evidence? Where's the research? It's not there. I know it's not there because I've read the book. The process of reflective thinking consists of these phases. Would be preceded by a perplexed, troubled, or confused situation, followed by cleared up, unified, resolved situation. Is anything resolved? Are there plenty of people looking at critical race theory and going, I'm sorry, what? Are the critical race theorists coming back and saying, here it is. Here's all the data. Here's the research. Here's the longitudinal study. Here's, all of this in every one of these areas. In other words, not just, in one area, but we extrapolate it out across all. Not just there was slavery once, therefore it extrapolates out. There was Jim Crow, it extrapolates out all over everything. There were racist people in the South, not all of them, but some, it extrapolates over all of society. Where is it? Where is this racism producing the outcomes? Show us how the mechanics work. Show us how oppression is preventing achievement in these areas today. Even if it's living in the psyche of a person, show us how that works. All right. Now I'm going to go down to the components of the process. So you'll see even more how critical race theory doesn't do this. Okay. Observing. One notices something in one's immediate environment, whatever it might be. Okay. Feeling. One feels puzzled or uncertain about something. Nope. Most critical theorists jump straight to certainty. I notice that you looked at me a little bit longer than you looked at the other person walking into the store, and I have black skin and she has white skin. Therefore, I conclude you are racist. That is a microaggression. We skipped all these steps. Maybe even feeling. I'm puzzled as to why you're looking at me longer, but now I've jumped all the way to conclusion. Okay. Wondering. This is a big missing step. One formulates a question to be addressed. I wonder if the person's looking at me longer because I have black skin. I wonder if they're staring at me because I'm afraid I'm going to steal something. I wonder if they're looking at me because they're wondering if I need some help. Do I look like I need some help? Maybe I need some help. I wonder if they're looking at me because they like my earrings. Imagining. One thinks of possible answers. All this happens within a nanosecond for today's critical race theorist. Okay? I observe you looking at me longer. I imagine that you're racist. I infer that you're racist. We go to inferring. One works out what would be the case if a possible answer were assumed. So now I'm going to infer. I'm assuming. But they did that. They did that like instantly. Knowledge. Oh, a big skip step. Big skip step. Right? One uses stored knowledge of the subject matter. Do you know me? Have you been in this store? Have you interacted with me before? Was I rude to you? Did I tell you it was because of your race? No, you do not have knowledge. to generate possible answers to infer what would be expected on the assumption of a particular answer. Again, you got to get some data, some information here. You don't have knowledge of a total stranger. They could be staring past you at what's going on outside the window, but you're so self-conscious or you're so sure you've been taught in school to be critically conscious of people looking at you with the microaggressions everywhere in the world that them looking past you or to the person standing immediately behind you who does look a little sketchy because they're carrying a giant bag is they're looking at you. I've literally seen this with my own eyes. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've had this happen to members of my family that somebody inferred that something that my husband did that was not even to that person was a direct assault on them because of racism, when my husband was not even remotely aware of the presence of this person. Okay? That's how bad it can get. Experimenting. One designs and carries out an experiment or a systematic observation to find out whether the results deduced from a possible answer will occur. Okay, so could you experiment in that situation? I suggest that you could. Walk into 4 or 5 other stores, see if the identical thing happens. See if it happens again every single time. Now, control for your own behavior. Are you doing anything? Are you looking sketchy? Are you, doing some stuff? There are things you can do, again, to slant the experiment in your favor to support your little theory, your little inference. So be very careful. Be careful what you're doing. But you could possibly construct an experiment to test that theory. Consulting. One finds a source of information, gets the information from the source. I don't know, go ask the person and don't decide that whatever answer they give you is a lie. If you're going to decide that something that somebody is telling you is more evidence that you're right, that's not an experiment. That's not consulting. Identifying and analyzing arguments. One notices an argument and works out its structure. Nope. You're fragile. Your argument is null and void. Judging. One makes a judgment on the basis of the accumulated evidence and reasoning, and now I make a decision. Again, the critical theorist goes from observing to deciding. Sometimes they don't even need to observe. Sometimes they go out and look for stuff. Doesn't have to be occurring at random. I'm going to now go look through all of children's literature. That's my task today. Look through all the traditional, popular, time-tested literature that children have loved, children of all races, all nationalities. Books have been translated into, dozens of languages. But I'm going to spend my time digging through it and finding all the ways it could possibly be judged to be racist. Yep, that's a good use of my time. And somehow that will magically assist in the reduction of racism. I'm going to be fighting racism when I do that. How? Like I said, let's go back to what does fighting racism look like? And what's your desired goal? Critical thinking is supposed to have a goal. So if critical race theory is about achieving a goal, what goal is that exactly? Feels a lot to me like what Joe Lewis was talking about when he said, just be a pain in the ass. Just be a pain in the ass. Just upset people. Same thing with Derek Bell. Just, piss people off. That's a goal in and of itself. Rules for radicals too. So if the goal isn't to actually solve the problem of racism and you just trying to be a thorn in people's side, if you think that solves anything, if you think that lifts anyone up and improves anybody's lives, no, it doesn't. All right. So I already talked about dispositions and abilities, but I'm going to very quickly go over what some dispositions are that you need to have in order to be a critical thinker. Attentiveness. I think critical theorists teach people to be very attentive, actually hyper-attentive, hyper-aware, possibly even neurotic. Habit of inquiry, totally missing. We're not interested in inquiring as to what's going on or why it's going on. It might be a rhetorical question like, you looking at me? But it's not going to be a sincere desire to get to the bottom of what's going on. Self-confidence. Lack of confidence in one's abilities can block critical thinking. So if you're already feeling self-confidence, like they don't like me, they're not gonna give me honest answers, I don't trust them, you're not disposed to critical thinking. You are biased already by your own lack of self-confidence in the situation. Courage. Fear of thinking for oneself can stop one from doing it. Do you think children today have courage in school? Do you think with today's teachers literally yelling and screaming at students, as we've seen on Zoom, calling them racist to their face, telling them that they're oppressors? And okay, you don't want me to talk about the white kids? Let's talk about the non-white kids or the black kids who are on the side of the white kids, their friends, who are like, I agree with them. Do you think they feel courage? What happens to you if you're black and you say, I don't believe in this stuff. I don't agree with critical race theory. I think it's bunk. What happens to you? Oh yeah, you're called an Uncle Tom. You could be canceled. You could be worse, physically assaulted. threatened, told you're not black, you need to turn in your black card. And sometimes you're told this by teachers. Sometimes you're talked over, you're interrupted. I mean, who hasn't seen at this point that Zoom call with the teacher in college with this very civil young man who is defending police? Now, you don't have to love police to admire the civility with which he talked to his professor who was being rude and dismissive and talking over him, being nasty, and pretty much accusing of being a white supremacist, accused all police officers of being white supremacists. Do you think that person's thinking critically? Willingness to suspend judgment? Pretty sure that's not happening. Trust in reason? Definitely not. We're told reason is whiteness. Seeking the truth? Nope, we know the truth. The critical theorists know the truth. They've told us the truth. The truth is racism. The answer to every question is racism. The answer to every question is white supremacy. Any denial, any disagreement, any questioning is evidence of white supremacy. It's very convenient. It's called a Kafka trap. And then you have internal, so those are the internal dispositions. You have to have, those, they're kind of how you think. And then you need abilities, okay? You need observational ability. You be able to look at things, name them, have a vocabulary to call them what they are as they are without any judgments at all. That's a person. She's looking at me. I'm in a store. There are other people. We are shopping. Okay, these are observational abilities. Emotional abilities. The emotions that drive a critical thinking process are perplexity or puzzlement, a wish to resolve it. Children experience these emotions at an early age without being trained to do so. Education that takes critical thinking as a goal needs only to channel these emotions and make sure not to stifle them. How do you stifle curiosity? How do you do that? And perplexity? When you tell somebody that their curiosity and perplexity and questioning is evidence of being a bad person. The fact that you're asking me these questions is evidence that you have ill intent towards Black people. You are racist. You are fragile. You want to maintain your power. That is how we squash critical thinking in its cradle. And the earlier you do it, the sooner you do it. Before they even have vocabulary to formulate the questions. So they're curious. They're like, but why? I don't know. Why do they hate us? Why don't they like people with brown skin? I don't understand. Because they're hateful and they're horrible white supremacists. They just want to keep their power, honey. Okay. You literally don't have a vocabulary to respond to that. Not only that, there's a power differential. You're a little kid. You're 8 years old. You're 9 years old. You're in school. That person gives you grades. That person can send you to the principal's office. You know perfectly well. Not only that, all of the peers in the class could beat you up, bully you, etc. And the teacher might not defend you. Especially if you're the only person raising your hand to ask this question. It's made abundantly clear to you that it is dangerous to be curious. Now, of course, you have to have, those questions. We said the questioning abilities, the inferential abilities, the ability to draw conclusions from given information. Okay, this is not something that all children have at the ready in kindergarten. Inferential abilities, you have a little bit, and then they build and they build and they build. And the more you learn and the more knowledge you have and the more you can relate things in your brain to other things that you know to draw inferences, the more experiences you've had on the planet, the more numbers of days you've breathed in and out, that adds to that. The younger you go, the less able you are to do this. And of course, experimenting abilities. Knowing how to design and execute an experiment is important, not just in scientific research, but also everyday life. Dewey devoted a whole chapter of his how we think to the superiority of experimentation over observation and advancing knowledge. Critical theorists do not advance experimentation as being even relevant, never mind superior to observation. Observation, lived experience, my feelings, my 5 senses are all I need. That's where we stop. I don't need to test any of that. And in fact, if you tell me I should, you're white-splaining, you're bullying me, and obviously being a racist. Consulting abilities. Do you think small children have the ability to consult with others or even know who to go to talk about these things and figure out if their experiment was good? I hope you're getting where I'm going with this. I am not saying, as I said at the outset, that children are not capable of critical thinking. I am saying that because they need these dispositional abilities and they need these actual critical thinking abilities, skills, the fewer skills they have. And again, remember, we're talking about children, some of whom are pre-literate, all the way up to kids who are not proficient in language, because we know that right now only about 35% of our students nationwide are. So even if we're talking to high school students, unless they are proficient at the written word, thinking, speaking, unless they have vocabularies, unless they've engaged with information from wide enough sources and been tasked with thinking critically at greater and greater depths all along, their ability to do this is hindered. They're behind where they would ordinarily be chronologically because they don't have the skills and the disposition hasn't been encouraged. So, and then of course, required knowledge, as I've said many times on this channel. Okay, we can derive a short list of concepts whose understanding contributes to critical thinking from the critical thinking abilities described in the preceding section. Observational abilities require an understanding of the difference between observation and inference. Do you think a small child knows the difference between observation and inference? No, they don't. No, they don't. They can walk in and see that cookies have been eaten. There's little crumbs all over the place. And they can look at it and go, "You ate all the cookies." Now, the cookies have been eaten, but it's an inference to decide that I ate them. Do you know the difference? All they know is cookies are gone, and they leapt to that conclusion. They're a small child. Now, I would challenge you to sit down with a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old and explain to them the difference. They'll probably figure it out eventually if you're very patient and kind with them, but it's not something they naturally know. You have to teach it, okay? Educational methods. Experimental educational interventions with control groups have shown that education can improve critical thinking skills and dispositions as measured by standardized tests. So you can do it. You can teach it. You have to teach it, in fact, because otherwise it will be very rudimentary. What educational methods are most effective at developing the dispositions, abilities, and knowledge of a critical thinker? Abrami et al. Found that in experimental and quasi-experimental studies that they analyzed dialogue, anchored instruction, and mentoring each increased the effectiveness of the educational intervention, and they were most effective when combined. They also found that in these studies, a combination of separate instruction and critical thinking with subject matter instruction in which students are encouraged to think critically was more effective than either by itself. However, the difference was not statistically significant. That is, it might have arisen by chance. Most of these studies lack the longitudinal follow-up required to determine whether the observed differential improvements in critical thinking abilities or dispositions continue over time, for example, until high school or college graduation. So in other words, you can lose ground. We've seen this. We've seen students whose parents have told us they left high school seeming to be skilled at critical thinking, being skeptical, asking questions, knowing how to design experiments, etc., not taking things at face value alone, being very curious, going off to college, spending enough time with a bunch of critical theorists in their classes and coming home going, "I know the truth and you're an idiot. Okay, boomer?" And parents being like, what? What happened to my child? So yes, you can go backwards. You can just stall out because these effects have to be practiced, kind of like a muscle. You have to use it. And if somebody comes along and rearranges the incentives such that you are disincentivized to use critical thinking skills, what do you think is going to happen, especially when you depend on things like grades for your future success? If you see your professor as an authority figure you need to defer to, or else in any way, shape, or form, you're incentivized to do what they say, to think what they tell you to think, and to attach to whatever they're teaching. All right. So it goes on from there. Again, I strongly suggest that you read this entire thing and judge for yourself. But I just wanted to walk you through it, as well as the whole definition of unfalsifiability. Well, what is indoctrination? Said I would do that, didn't I? If you indoctrinate someone, you teach that person a one-sided view of something and ignore or dismiss opinions that don't agree with your view. Do you think that you can walk into a classroom in America right now where they are doing diversity, equity, inclusion, critical race theory, social emotional learning, or any of the other buzzwordy terms used to define this kind of teaching, that there's such a thing as white supremacy that's just inherent in white skin? It's everywhere in our society, all of our institutions, and it is the reason for any disparity between black and brown people and white people. There are no other reasons. It is the reason. And that the only way to solve these problems, and of course they're all defined as a problem. No one ever looks at, for example, the disparity in, certain disciplines as maybe people aren't interested in those disciplines. Maybe there are other factors going on, like individual choice or cultural preferences or whatever. No. It's all because of oppression. This is how they operate. Indoctrination is saying, this is the view, this is the truth. Any other suggestion that it's something else is by definition racism. Maybe the poverty is linked to the fatherlessness. Racist. Maybe all of the police encounters are a function of increased levels of crime. Racist. maybe not all cops are, engaging specifically with Black people because they're Black. Racist. That's literally indoctrination. Anytime you tell the person who suggests those things or questions those things that their point of view is de facto evil, or you just shut down that debate and say, we're not going to discuss that. The reason for it is this. We did the study and we found and we read this and this is true. Moving on. And we know because we have all kinds of video footage, we have testimony from parents, children, etc. We know that these are things going on in today's classrooms. Are all teachers doing it? No, of course not. Are all teachers guilty of this? No. Is there a heavy emphasis on indoctrination amongst those who teach and want to continue teaching critical race theory? Yes, 100%. Yes. Because everything I just read you as the tenets, these tenets are unfalsifiable. They are literally the foundation of indoctrination. You cannot teach critical race theory in school as just a theory. Let's just discuss it as, one possible explanation for all of these problems is white supremacy. But let's look at this competing theory. That's not how they're doing it. They're not reading Thomas Sowell alongside Robin DiAngelo. If they were, I wouldn't be complaining. But they're not. In fact, Thomas Sowell's not really allowed. And how do we know that? And I'll just use Glenn Lowry as an example. We know that because Paul Rossi, the math teacher at Grace Church Academy, which is a private school, but even there, suggested that possibly for viewpoint diversity's sake, he explore with his students Glenn Lowry and Glenn Lowry's opinions, which are against critical race theory. And he was told, no, don't choose somebody who's of the conservative persuasion and Black, choose somebody else who isn't. Because apparently you can't be conservative and Black. There's one way to think when you're Black. That's literally indoctrination. So we know this is going on. This is not this. I mean, you can debate it if you like, but unless you're telling me that in the classroom, they are allowing side-by-side viewpoints to be acknowledged equally and the teacher's not weighing in going, well, we have to look at this, but, he's probably been around white people too long. Yeah, pretty sure. They don't even mention Thomas Sowell. So I know I said I was going to talk about propaganda, and I'm probably going to end up having to do it in a different video because we're already at about an hour, and I apologize for the length, but it's kind of a dense topic, and I wanted to give you the context because that's the way I've added value to this content. Otherwise, you're not going to be sure how to relate what I'm explaining back to the curriculum or back to the language, because remember, they don't call it critical race theory in the classroom. They don't call it critical race theory at the school board meeting. That's what you're calling it. And they're going, what? We don't do that. What are you talking about? Okay. That's kind of part of the propaganda. Part of what they're doing is what's called a Mott and Bailey. It's a little word game, a little thing that they do where they go out and repeat the tenets of anti-racism, according to Robin DiAngelo, in the classroom, in the teacher trainings. In fact, they get really explicit in teacher trainings. And if you think that's not so that it goes into the classroom, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you don't need a boxed curriculum to understand that if you sit teachers down for a training on how to decenter their whiteness and interrogate their whiteness and, bankrupt their whiteness, bankrupt their privilege, understand that they're spirit murderers of Black children and all of these things that we know that teachers have been through. In fact, one training that I'm going to profile in a video coming up soon in Denver went really far off the cliff with this stuff. When that's going on in training, if you think they're not going back into the classroom with that stuff, I can't help you. Of course they are. What's the point of it? So that's where the propaganda is. That's not critical thinking. You're not teaching the teachers how to teach. You're indoctrinating the teachers so the teachers can turn around and then indoctrinate the students in the identical value system and the identical unfalsifiable claims that those students are oppressors and their fellow non-white students are the oppressed, and divide the world up according to these groups, as the critical theorists would have you do, for political gain. And that is the purpose of propaganda. Propaganda is, as I'll go over in another video, where you lie. I mean, you take something that looks like information. It sounds like it could be true. It may even have a tiny little element of truth. And then you tell a lie. And usually it's a really big one. It's a doozy. And you repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it often enough that it becomes easier to believe. You sort of desensitize people. And that's kind of where we are now, where a term like white supremacy, which used to conjure up like swastikas and Nazi flags and all kinds of other things, even the Confederate flag, is now just the Declaration of Independence. I mean, you know, a mere year ago, if you said something was white supremacist, you wouldn't think Declaration of Independence, would you? But here we are. So that's how it works. But we've been at this pretty long, so I'm gonna quit now. I thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, I hope this is helpful. I hope it's added value. If it has, I hope you will like, share, comment, subscribe, and join my locals community so we can continue this and other conversations like it, so I can help you defeat these terrible ideas so they don't make it into your child's brain, replacing their ability to think critically so they can become a fully functioning, autonomous individual in the world. Anyway, that's it. That's the video.